Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mastering Jira Workflows webinar by Hidalgo. Thank you for coming. Now, why did we choose this topic, Mastering Jira Workflows? Well, workflows are something that help us on our Jira way, well, all the time that we're working with issues, right? So this webinar should be aimed both for beginners, intermediate admins, and experts. For the beginners and intermediates, it'll be an introduction to the whole problematic and the whole mechanism of the workflows, and a very nice reminder to some that already know how to work with workflows well. For the experts, there will be some bits and pieces from best practices working with workflows, some interesting use cases for Jira apps that work with workflows. So I believe everyone will find something to his or her liking. This webinar is also handy for your Jira administration or project administration certification because we will be going through different types of transitions, advanced workflow mechanisms, and of course, best practices. My name is Camille, and I've been working with the Atlassian toolset from 2014. I worked 4 years for Atlassian Partners and 2 years for Vodafone Czech Republic. I come from Prague, and I would say that my specialty over the years has become cleaning cluttered Jiras, Confluences with performance problems, just, cleaning them up, taking care of governance, upholding best practices, standardization, and it was hard. It's very hard. So, but it's also very interesting because then again, you see that the tool works well and everybody knows how to get around. Along with me, there will be Guillaume Lorquet. And Guillaume, could you say a few words about yourself, please?
Of course. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And I
Yeah.
hope our viewers too.
Hello, everyone. So I am Guillaume. I come from Belgium. I work for Hidalgo for almost a year now, but I worked with Atlassian product for more than this. I am also certified with the Confluence certification, Jira project administration certification, and I have also my batch about the workflow, because to me, workflow is probably the most important part in Jira to manage your task. Then I am also a kind of guy who like Camille, clean up a little bit all the tool and all the platform from our customer. So if you have any question about it, I will be happy to help you with that as well.
For the intro, Guillaume, I'll just like to mention our roles. I will be presenting the content, and the Guillaume, in the meantime, will be answering questions in the chat, and even during the presentation, he'll be here to help you. So, what exactly are we going to go through here? Well, I decided to have 4 chapters regarding workflows for this webinar. The first one will be Introduction to Workflows, and I already know what you're thinking, like, oh, we know everything about workflows, the basics, and it's fine, it's fine. This is just a very short reminder of what we'll be going through. Then we'll go through advanced workflow mechanisms. Maybe you already know some of these, like conditions, post functions, validators, and types of transitions, which is something that is very often in certifications, like what's a global transition? How does a common transition work? So it will be something that's both practical and good for the certifications and the badges. Then we'll go through workflow best practices, including but not limited to sizing conventions, naming conventions, troubles that resolution fields can do in your Jira. So those are for some of the veterans that are here with us. And lastly, we'll speak about how to extend workflows with apps. And that means how to find a good workflow app, which ones are on the market, and which interesting use cases can they support. So lastly, this webinar will take 2 hours, and we'll have a brief pause after an hour for like 5 or 10 minutes, so you can go for a refreshment. And again, I would like to say that this should not be a lecture, this shouldn't be like a speech. We very much appreciate all of your questions, comments, remarks regarding what we'll be showing you. So please feel free to write us in chat. we'll gladly help you if we have the time. Like I said, Guillaume will support the questions and answer part of the webinar. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to ask you, why did you come to this webinar? Why did it interest you? And well, what should be the takeaway that you're expecting? What are you interested in regarding these topics? Please write us a few words in chat so we can get a general idea of what are you interested in and what brought you here. Again, thank you for having us. Okay, so while you're writing your answers in our chat, and thank you for that, I will progress through our topics. So, first of all, introduction to workflows. So, let's begin with a fairly general Jira workflow description. We'll cover the basics first, so that we have a good foundation for the topics that are to come. So, what is a workflow? Simply put, well, it's simply a business process. That's translated into Jira, that Jira issues can work with. But most importantly, this mapping is done by translating the business process into Jira system of statuses and transitions. What these are, we'll cover in a minute. Now, workflows shouldn't be just some arbitrary thing that you need to set up in Jira that's cumbersome and difficult to work with. No, the whole purpose of the translation of the business process into Jira is to provide a comprehensible and easy to understand representation of the process. Users should know what's expected of them and what happens next on each step of the way. So, what makes a workflow? Well, the basic building blocks of a workflow are statuses. Statuses are fields, like any other pieces of information in an issue, that tell you which stage of the process that issue is in. Moreover, even though a workflow might have many statuses, every status has one of three colors. These colors are categories representing where, in the overall process, an issue is. A status can be either gray, blue, or green. A gray status means that the work on the issue haven't started yet. Examples of these statuses are new, to do, or open. A blue status means that work is happening on an issue right now. Common blue statuses are in progress, in review, testing, and so on. Now, some of you might be using a server version or a data center version or deployment of Jira. In these cases, the in progress category will be yellow. And finally, a green status means that there is no more work left on the issue. It's been resolved. Common green statuses are done, resolved, or closed. Issues with green statuses have one specialty. They contain a field called resolution with a description of how was the issue resolved. Transitions are links that connect statuses together. In a workflow diagram, these are the arrows pointing from one status to another that tell you which status can go into another status. We have an example with a transition from in progress to start testing. They also have names like start progress or start testing. The important thing here is that the names of these transitions are then the same as the names of the buttons in an issue, because as you know, you can find several buttons that change workflows in a Jira issue, and these buttons are named after the transitions. I have included two, start progress and start testing. These are the actual buttons that you will see in an issue. Resolutions. Now, Resolutions are issue fields that appear at the end of a workflow. While not being as visible in a workflow as statuses or transitions, they're always added at the end of the process, usually when issues enter a green status, as in the first green status in a row. For example, on the picture on the right, you see that a resolution would be added between testing and resolved statuses. While a status specifies what state the issue is in, the actual step in the process, the resolution tells you how exactly was the issue resolved. Was it closed as something that we won't do? Or was it closed because a similar issue was already created and this one is closed as a duplicate? While a status is the what, the resolution is the how. Many times administrators forget to add resolutions into their workflows, which results in problematic filter results, mm, misleading boards, agile boards, and we will look more onto that in the following parts. Lastly, there are two types of workflows that you can use, either a regular workflow or a simplified workflow. Regular workflows follow a more stricter process and don't allow you to skip certain statuses because the issue must go through all of those statuses or most of them. However, you can create any transitions you want, perhaps from the open status to closed, that would automatically set up a resolution, for example, or from the resolved status back to open, which would add, for example, one to a field that counts the number of reopens of the issue. Like every time the issue goes from resolved back to open, the number of reopens is is one higher or 1 point higher. These workflows are better for complicated processes that need to work to go through them in a certain order or that have multiple statuses. On the other hand, simplified workflows allow you to transition from any status to any other status. They're usually used with agile projects, on Scrum boards, on Kanban boards, so you can move the issues from any column on the Kanban or Scrum boards to another. However, while they appear to be more practical, that might not always be the case, because then they might confuse the users if they contain too many statuses. Because again, the user on each step of the way would have the option to go through multiple statuses, and unless these statuses are aptly named, the user will be quite confused. So even though simplified workflows might look more practical or more flexible, they're actually harder to implement in a very complex process. However, for a board with just a few statuses, they're just fine. Now, before we progress to the next part, I'd like to take a look at what you wrote us in the chat. So, yes, the best practices working with the workflows we will of course cover. Laura is saying that my workflows in my classic Jira are way too complicated. That might happen. That happens very often. And in the best practices section, we will look at ways to make them a little bit more simpler, easier to work with, and to get a better understanding of the working of workflows as well as best practices. Yes, you're in the right place. So it seems that most of you have very similar reasons as to why you came to our webinar. So hopefully the next part will be more interesting too. So advanced workflow mechanisms. In the next part, we'll go through the advanced workflow mechanics or mechanisms. You could say that this is an administrator's daily bread when customizing Jira and everything important about these mechanisms. So what are these exactly? Well, there are several options how you can modify a transition. These are called conditions, validators, post functions, triggers, and properties. And they all do all kinds of helpful functions. If you have administrator permissions, you can change these on any workflow. If you go to a project, project settings and find the workflow that you want to change and edit it, you'll find a similar screen to what we're showing here. This is called the diagram edit mode. So Jira will create a draft workflow that you can play around with and publish when it's ready. Then, when you select a specific transition, you can modify the transitions options. What this means is that there are many customizations available to add to your workflows, which might also tempt administrators to add as much of them as possible. But be aware, if you over customize your workflows, if you add too many conditions and post functions and similar features, these workflows will be very hard to document and understand. So in this case, less is more, and standardized workflows are a way to go if you can standardize some of the processes. But if you need to make them complex, make sure to document them somewhere accessible. For example, in a Confluence document connected to the project. This is good because both the users can understand what's happening, but even the other admins that are working with the workflows will actually understand why do they behave the way they behave. So one of the semi-advanced functionalities that you can work with is adding fields to transition. Now, you might be familiar with screens from setting up projects. Those that aren't, a very simplified way to describe screens is that screens are a series of fields that appear in the project's issues when you, for example, create an issue or edit it. You can also put these screens inside a workflow on a specific transition. This way, whenever someone executes a workflow transition, he's prompted to fill out the fields that you choose. Some of the fields are always mandatory, like resolution. Some can be made mandatory, and we'll show you how next. You can put as much fields as you'd like on each transition, but again, it's recommended not to overdo it so that the users aren't interrupted as much. But when closing an issue, it's always recommended to put a resolution field on the transition screen. Lastly, you can put an empty screen on a transition, and this screen will show only the comment section. It will only prompt the user to add a comment. This approach is also useful when more details about work that you're working with in the workflow need to be specified, such as the fixed version or the effects version fields when you transition the issue to in progress, for example, when users actually start working on the issue. So they'll need to specify in which version will they release it, or in which version does the bug actually occur. Or the approver field when you transition the issue to the approval stage, for example, in a service desk project. So the first workflow feature is a condition. What conditions are? Well, they allow you to set up when exactly can you execute a transition. Or in other words, when does a workflow button become visible to users? For example, you would use a condition when you want only the reporter of an issue to be able to close it. You would set a condition saying reporter only. Or when you need to approve an expense, for example, your customer created a ticket that requires, let's say, some piece of hardware, then only a user belonging to the manager's Jira group or the change advisory board Jira group can approve this issue. Nobody else will see the transition button. In other cases, the issue can be transitioned only if its subtasks are closed, or similarly, that you would transition an epic only if all of its stories are complete. You create a condition on the epic workflow that says, show the resolve transition only if all of the children issues, in this case stories, are complete. Now, I have included a few useful conditions that are handy for real-life use cases. For example, the subtask blocking condition prevents an issue from being transitioned unless its subtasks are in a specific statuses. What this means, and I've already mentioned this, is that you cannot, for example, close a story until its subtasks are all resolved or closed, which prevents misunderstanding as to why a story is closed when there are still active subtasks on it. The hide from user condition might seem as useless at first sight. However, there might be situations when only a robot user, and by robot user, I mean a user that nobody logs under, that's only used for automations, for example, with admin rights, for example, the automation for Jira user can transition an issue, and displaying the transition to users would only confuse them. So a good example is a self-reflecting transition. We'll get onto that, what a self-reflecting transition is later, that synchronizes an issue to another project. So the only assignee and only reporter conditions mean that only the users in a specified role will see the transition button. These are also conditions that allow only users in various groups or project roles to transition the issue. For example, only the user in the approver project might approve an expense request, or only the QA testers group can mark a bug issue as resolved. These conditions are the most common ones that are used because they essentially say if you're not a member of a group or a member of a project role, or you're not mentioned in a custom field, you cannot transition the issue. You cannot change the status of this particular issue in this particular workflow. I've already mentioned something called self-reflecting transitions. So what are they? And when are they usually used? Well, they're transitions from one status to the same status. So basically a transition from status A to status A. While, again, at first sight this seems hardly useful in practice, there are two major use cases for these transitions. A, some transitions are automatic and should be performed only by robotic users because they would confuse regular users or they're simply not supposed to be executed by users. Let's say you want to automatically synchronize automatically synchronize issues between two projects using the XLA tab whenever an issue passes into the testing status. So you would set up a rule in automation for Jira, for example, that says whenever an issue transitions to the testing status, execute the xlate self-reflecting transition. The xlate transition would be hidden for users, but would get executed by the robot user nevertheless. What this means that some automation will happen on the background using the self-reflecting transition. Or B, Jira doesn't have a native field level security option. However, you can create a self-reflecting transition, set up a screen to be shown during the transition, and put the restricted field on this screen. Then, configure a condition that says that only some users can execute this transition. Again, maybe the conditions called user is in group or user is in project role. And what would happen is that only these users would be able to execute this transition. Lastly, remove the restricted field from the edit screen. And we actually have a field level security option. Now, a common objection to this approach is, so what if the users execute a bulk change? What if they do a bulk change of the field? Well, I wouldn't really recommend giving the bulk change global permission to just about any user because it can do a lot of harm and it's hard to revert. So it's somewhat of a best practice to keep the bulk change global permission reserved to only the power users or the admins. Now, you can also set up a value that a value needs to be entered into this field during the transition, and the field will be mandatory. You would accomplish this by validators, about which we will talk next. So, validators. The second advanced option is a validator which works, again, during the transition. Unlike conditions, the validators are, well, they don't hide workflow buttons, but if all validators' requirements aren't fulfilled, they will not let you finish the transition. They'll stop you with an error. They will say, for example, fill out this field first, or the field fixed version cannot be empty. Most often, validators are used to compare field values, ensure if a field is not empty, or that a comment was added. These are some of the most often used validators. The field required validator, as per its name, requires a user to enter some information during the transitions. These validators are most often used when combined with screens during transitions. One of the most notorious examples is how an issue will not be closed until you enter its resolution. Well, these validators behave the same way. They will simply block the transition from being executed until the field has a value. The field has been modified validator is used when a previous value of a field needs to be changed. For example, when an assignee needs to be changed when the issue enters the approval status, or if the issue that was resolved was reopened, there might be an additional field has been modified validator when the resolution changes. For example, the resolution was won't do, now the resolution might change to done. So the field needs to be modified when you close the issue again. A good use case for the field has single value validator is when you have a field with multiple values, such as the fixed version that you're reporting on. For the reports to not show misleading data, the issue needs to have only one value in that field when it's resolved. And this is when you would use the validator to make sure that even though the fixed versions or components or some multi-select fields might have multiple values, this validator would make sure that only one value remains. Lastly, the parent status validator is useful for subtasks or stories inside an epic. For example, if the parent story hasn't been approved yet, you can work on its subtasks. Validators are sometimes used in common transitions. A common transition is when you reuse an existing transition, linking two or even more different statuses into another status. The upside of the common transition is that it shares the same conditions, validators, and other advanced settings whenever you use it, or in this case, reuse it, preventing human error when you would create a new transition and then make sure that everything is set up. A common transition is basically a clone of another existing transition. Let's say, for example, that you need to specify the fixed version field whenever an issue transitions into the resolved status. But the issue can transition from both in progress and testing statuses. So to make your work easier, you can create a common transition and add the validator fields required for the field fixed version only once. Whenever you use a common transition, whenever you delete all of these common transitions. So if I were to delete the in progress transition, it will disappear also from the testing. So you need to pay attention while removing these types of transitions. Nevertheless, they're useful when you don't want to configure all the advanced workflow features on every transition. Post functions. Post functions, I would say post functions are the most used or the most favorite of the advanced workflow functions that administrators use. Post functions are things that happen after a transition. An example might be when an issue is created with several subtasks. Or a field might be emptied. For example, when the issue is reopened, the resolution is cleared. Often, post functions are used to change a field value, which is what the update issue field post functions do. Whether it's automatically setting a resolution for a resolved issue or setting the due date to, let's say, today or after several days, This is the post function you would use. Another often used post function is the assign to current user. When a user starts working on an issue by, for example, selecting the start progress transition, the issue will be automatically assigned to him. This is nothing really big or terribly useful. However, it makes the user's job easier. It saves him a few clicks because it's automatically assigned to the issue he starts working on. You can also reuse this transition when you would reopen an issue because the post function would assign it to you as the reopening user. The clear field value is often used when an issue is reopened, so that an issue that's in progress doesn't contain a resolution. And copying values might be useful, for example, when you want to copy the, let's say, effects version fields to the fixed version field to tell others that the issue was fixed in the same version it was found in. Now, these conditions, validators, and post functions are similar across cloud, server, and data center deployments of Jira. However, these features are available out of the box only on cloud. On server and data center, you need to purchase a separate add-on, and we will talk about these add-ons as we go through the webinar. I would say that most of them are very reasonably priced, and some of them are also free. And for post functions, for example, you can use the automation for Jira app, which again is available both on server and data center and is integrated into the cloud deployment. A global transition sometimes makes sense to be used together with various post functions because global transitions are what simplified workflows are made of. There are transitions that enable you to go to a certain status from any other status marked by the all sign. So what this means is that sometimes you might want to reopen an issue by moving it into the to-do status, but you need to make sure that its resolution will be cleared, even though there are other statuses you might transition it from. So you would add the clear field post function with the resolution field. And what this post function would do is that it would clear or empty the resolution field that was previously set when the issue went to done. So whenever the issue enters in progress or to do, there will be a post function that would clear the resolution field so that you're not working it with an issue that's marked as resolved. Or whenever you start progress on an issue, it's you who started it, and thus you should be the assignee. So you would use the assign to current user post function on a global transition leading to the in progress status. Triggers. Now, triggers are seldom used, but it's good to know why and when are they used. They activate when something happens in a connected distributed version control system, or a DVCS. These are systems that help developers make their code. The examples are Bitbucket, which supports the Git method, Crucible and Fisheye, which support the SVN and Perforce method. And then again, you have the non-Atlassian DVCS like GitHub, GitLab, and so on. What this means in the context of workflow triggers is that the workflow gets an impulse to change from outside of Jira. To be able to use triggers, you need to connect your Jira to a DVCS. For example, Bitbucket. The purpose of triggers is to make users avoid duplicate work. When they do something in their DVCS, the change happens in Jira simultaneously. They don't need to do it in two places, once in Bitbucket and once in Jira. This is automated by triggers. The use cases for triggers are usually very basic. For example, when a developer creates a branch, his code, and the issue is in to-do status, it will get transitions into the in-progress status once the branch is created. That's because there's a trigger connected to the to-do in-progress transition that watches the DVCS for a branch to be created or a commit to be entered. Another very common use case is when a branch gets marked with a pull request in DVCS, so the connected issue transitions to a in review status. Here are a few examples of triggers that are included whenever you connect your Jira to a DVCS. So we have a branch created and commit created. That's where you would use the trigger from the to-do to in progress status, for example, because as the user creates a branch, his issue will transition. And there's several pull requests triggers, which actually transition the issue based on the status of the pull request. So when a pull request is created, the connected Jira issue transitions to in review, for example, status, or to be reviewed status. And there's a few more, again, that that are based on the pull requests status. So we have went through 4 types of transitions. The regular transitions are those that you see most of the time. They connect 2 statuses together. Common transitions are transitions that work the same, and they end in the same status. Global transitions transition the issue to the chosen status from any place in the workflow. They're also used in simplified workflows. Self-reflecting transitions cycle back to the same status and are usually used to change secure fields or for robotic operations. We have also went through 4 advanced workflow mechanisms. Conditions that work as restrictions on transitions, hiding the transition buttons that are used mainly with roles and groups. Validators that check for a certain value, a field, or a state being true during the transition, and used mostly with mandatory fields. Post functions that performs various automations after the transition, and triggers that are activated automatically when something happens in a DVCS. In the next part, we will go through the workflow best practices, important bits and pieces that make work with workflows for both the administrators and users much more easier. But before we move on, however, I wanted to ask if someone has any questions, comments, or insights regarding what we've been through, as in the advanced workflow mechanisms and the workflows in general. Write them down in chat, please, so we can answer them in a few minutes. Okay, so thanks to Laure for his questions. Thanks a lot. And thanks to Guillaume for answering in the chat. If you're interested in some interesting questions and answers, then make sure to check out the chat, the discussion that's happening in there. Okay, so we're in about halfway through the webinar. So let's take a short 5-minute break, and we'll continue to the best practices in a few minutes. Thank you so far. Back to the presentation. We got another question from Laure. is I think we have a problem with done/closed versus resolved and unresolved. One is a status and one is a resolution. Now, I've mentioned in the first part that the statuses are descriptive and it is in let's say the current step of the workflow, in the current state of the issue, like what state the issue is in. Is it to do? Is it in progress? Is it done? Is it closed? And resolutions are applicable only when the issue reached the end of its workflow. When it's in the green statuses like resolved, closed, done, cancelled, things like that. What the resolution is, that resolution tells you why or how was the issue resolved, or why was it closed, how was it resolved. Resolution actually applies only to the end of the workflow, while a status is something that a workflow is built off. The resolution is the why or the how, and the status is the what, as in what state. Was that clear enough? Okay, great. You're very welcome. So let's move on. Let's move on to workflow best practices. Thank you for staying with us. Let's go. So first of all, naming conventions for statuses and for transitions. It's good to name our statuses so that all users know what is being done right now and what is expected of them, and of course, what happens next. You shouldn't expect that they will read the workflow documentation. They won't most of the time, so they should understand what's going on once they see the Jira issue. Status is like in review and in testing, clear state what's going on. The issue is being reviewed, it's being tested. So you should name the statuses in such a way that they reflect what is going on right now. Do not name them with names like testing finished. Okay, so the testing is finished, but what comes next? What's happening right now? Statuses like resolved, closed, and cancelled are exceptions because workflows usually end with them. Nothing happens after. And usually no more work is required when the issue is in the resolved, closed, cancelled, or done statuses, or the green statuses, or the done category. That's the same. Statuses should also be descriptive, but not, too descriptive. Saying step one, that tells us nothing, but in testing tells us everything. So it's good to name statuses in such a way that they can also be reused. You can use in testing status in many projects, which is not the case with the UAT testing phase one. Again, a lot of the context or the meaning of the statuses comes from the project itself. You can use the same status for the testing project for your waterfall testers and in the project for agile testers. The statuses don't need to be named, I don't know, agile testing complete or waterfall testing complete. In testing, that's just fine because you can reuse the status in all other projects or in all the workflows that actually utilize the testing phase or the testing step. Transitions, they're a little bit of a different animal. Transitions should always be verbs. Why? Well, when a user sees the issue for the first time, the workflow needs to guide him, right? So he needs to see like a big red, or in this case, a big gray button with which the user can say, I have done this. He should always be able to choose that he, let's say, started doing something like start progress, or that he finished something like testing done. It's good to not name transition like other issue buttons like assign, comment, or edit. This will simply confuse the users. They will see like two buttons that say comment or assign. And do not make the transition names too long, because a long name will not be visible when you check the Jira issue view screen. Lastly, do not put too many workflow options from one status. This will just confuse the users as they will need to browse a large list of possible transitions and statuses. Make it simple. In Server and DC, you won't even see all the buttons in the issue view unless you tinker with the properties file on the application server. So that's a thing for another time. Sizing recommendations. Okay, so when creating workflows, it's incredibly easy to fall into the trap that you need to have a status for everything, for each small step. Thing is, you shouldn't, because huge workflows confuse the users, as they will need to remember every status and what happens in it, because you may run out of ideas for descriptive enough statuses quite fast. A good rule of thumb, which is also recommended by Rachel Wright, Jira book author, that's been on Hidalgo's podcast some time ago, is to have 7 or 8 statuses maximum. If you have more, it might be a better idea to merge several steps into one status, like a phase, and create a checklist or a custom field in an issue to track all the steps. Or better yet, split the process into multiple parts or subtasks. However, if you feel that you need to have a long workflow, do not make a simplified workflow that you see on the right side, also called an agile workflow or the board workflow, as the users simply won't know what to do next. Like I said, they will have to choose from many statuses, and unless there's like a team leader or scrum master sitting there with them, they will many times choose the wrong status. So when creating workflows, try to keep it simple, try to keep it to only as few statuses as possible. And if you have a large workflow, do not make a simplified workflow. There will be too many options and it'll confuse the users easily. Whenever you want to add a new status, think if it's really necessary. Good questions to ask yourself while adding a status are: will the status be easy to understand for users? Is it descriptive enough? Will they know what to do next? Will you need to report on the new status? How often? Will it be included in some filter? Will it be filtered often? Will there be JQL queries created on this type of status? The point is, if you're not using the status besides the actual workflow for things like filtering or creating reports or signifying a very important phase where, let's say, an assignee changes that you need a different user to work on the issue in the new status, why make it? What's the purpose? Again, this is hard. It's very hard because the Jira interface makes it very easy to add a new status. But again, try to keep it simple. Try to keep it to the minimum required status. Resolutions. So if in your workflows you're using both the resolved and closed status, which happens quite often, I think a few default Jira workflows actually contain both the resolved and the closed status. Ensure that users know the difference, because it's not really apparent. It's a very small nuance thing. The resolved status is when work has been finished on the issue, and it might await a final review before the issue is closed. A closed issue is when no more activity is to be done on the issue, and it can be safely forgotten, so to say. It's it's a very small distinction, but it is there. Resolved issues still might require somebody else to look at them, perhaps a team leader or a dev lead, something like that. While closed issues, those are the issues that the dev lead has already looked on and said, okay, and they're safely to forget, so to say. Also, when resolving an issue, have users fill the resolution on a screen that you add to the resolve transition. Or if you don't want your users to choose the resolution, just use a post function that will set the resolution, for example, done. If you have let's say, a cancelled status, then it doesn't make much sense to have the users choose a resolution. You can just set the resolution to cancelled by a post function. Also, when you have a transition that reopens the issue from a status where a resolution has already been set, like resolved or closed, put a post function on the transition that clears the resolution field. This is done so you can avoid the scenario where users don't see reopened issues on their boards because they have a resolution. For example, the dashboard gadget assigned to me shows only issues that are unresolved. So if you would reopen an issue and not remove the contents of the resolution field, the users would not see the reopened issue. Or sometimes resolved issues don't appear on boards just because they have a resolution. So make sure to check your workflows that they have a resolution post function or a screen that sets a resolution, and that in the reopen transition or any transition that goes from a resolved status, for example, that this transition has a clear field resolution post function. It really helps. It helps to, so to say, it helps to not forget the important issues and to not display misleading data. And when building a workflow, it's also handy to enable power users, which may be the project lead or the manager, to go to the previous status to revert various mistakes. Users click on weird buttons all the time, and it happens to everyone. Someone should have the opportunity to, revert the misclick or the wrong button. It's also useful to label this transition back distinctively, such as by including the move back or the back words at the start of the transition, like move back to do or back to do. Those were some of the best practices that are useful to learn when building workflows. In the next part, we will go through the benefits of workflow apps and what they can bring to the table. But at this moment, I want to ask if there are other workflow best practices that you, the listeners, are upholding yourself and that you feel that shouldn't be missed out on. We're sure that there are more that we haven't mentioned, so write us in chat, please. Again, we'll take a few minutes to go through some of the best practices that you're using before we move on. Okay, so for example, Guillaume, do you know of any best practices that I haven't mentioned here that should be also mentioned when building workflows? We have a reply from Rob. Thank you. Naming transition, I often use to followed by the next status and back to when it's going back in the workflow. Yes, absolutely. It's a great way to distinguish between forward statuses and back statuses. Back to you, Guillaume.
Did you also talk about the event? the last post function on the workflow on the transition.
Okay, events. Yeah, that's a interesting feature. So could you tell us more and how can they be leveraged?
Yeah, of course. So when you have a workflow, of course, you have the status, you have the transition. So Camille already talked about it, but in the transition, the post function, you have some, it's kind of order of actions that is going to be done by the system itself. And so the event is the last post function that you can find in the transition. It's something that you have all time in the transition. The events are fired for many reasons, and one of them is also about, let's say, notification. So maybe you already know the notification scheme, and so meaning that in the notification scheme you can find issue created, issue commented, etc. So it's kind of action that you can't manage by yourself because it's something that comes from your action or the user action itself. But sometimes if you talk about, like Laurie talked about, as a reopen or the resolved issue or even the closed issue, it's also an event. And so it's, to me, really important also to talk about it because if you don't use it correctly, maybe you won't get the notification, for example. So when you come from a status in progress and you go to a status like done, for example, it means that your issue will probably be resolved. And so you can manage the event at the end of the post function. So when you create a transition, it's always generic event. And so you can edit this event and telling to the system that it's not a generic event, but it's clearly an issue resolved event. And so in this case, first of all, yes, it's going to send a notification to all the internal user related to your notification scheme. So if you use issue reopen, same way you would like to be aware about it. And so if you have a transition that comes from, let's say, done and goes to open, in this case, you would like to use issue reopen. And so you send a notification to the specific user that you want. So it's important not only for the notification, because the event could also be used with a lot of other tools, like I've already seen it for Jira email this issue, for example, and sometimes you have some other tool that use it and saying that if this event is being fired by the system, you do this action. So it means that you could also create your own event if necessary. So be careful with that because you should not create too much event. An event is something shared with all the system. So as Camille said for the status, of course, you should also use always the same wording, etc. So to don't duplicate too much for nothing. It's something really nice to get always the same words that you use. And so if people would like to reuse, for example, an event or a status, they can find directly the good one. So that's something really important. So if you take a look to all the workflow that you manage, you could also take a look to the event when it's necessary. And if you want to get the list of the events, just go in the notification scheme and you will see all the events available with your system. Is it something good to you, Camille?
Events are many times overlooked, but they can do they can do some interesting magic regarding notifications. So events, yep, that's something that could be covered in the next similar session on workflow. So thanks. All right, so let's move on. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Naushat. Let's move on to the next part, workflow best practices, where we can see what the workflow apps can offer. So when exactly are workflow apps used? Well, usually when we start using workflow app, it's because the workflow features in Jira aren't simply enough for us. we have a pressing use case for which we need to use an extra post function, or we have learned about an interesting app that could make our users' everyday work with Jira easier. Other reasons include automating with post functions. Many apps have such automation features such as Jira Miss Workflow Extension, Script Runner, Automation for Jira, and many more. You could say that automatic is already done in cloud via Automation for Jira, but it's not really a workflow app. It doesn't have any conditions or validators, and actually has a limited set of automation global executions per month. A global execution of an automation means that an event that actually involves more projects in Jira. So this is the reason why people usually adopt these workflow apps. They bring interesting conditions, validators, post functions, and other interesting functionalities to your Jira instance. On the right side, I have included several of the most useful workflow apps. And I'm very sorry if a vendor is watching and I haven't included his app. I'm sorry, I just picked the most most popular ones on the Atlassian marketplace, which doesn't mean that they're most useful. It's just they're most adapted. How to choose a good app? Because there are many. There are many apps that improve workflows on the Atlassian marketplace. So while searching for these apps and choosing which ones to use, you should keep an eye out for these indicators. The first of them is a rating and the number of ratings. Well, these ratings are similar to, well, any other review, let's say a restaurant review or an application review. Users that use the app actually rate what they think about it, and they sometimes leave interesting insights in the comments underneath the app on the Atlassian marketplace. So that's a good indicator to check how the app is being rated. The number below the rating is the number of deployments. In reality, I think the number is a little bit higher because this number doesn't include all the demo instances and sandbox instances where the app was installed. So this is also a good gauge of how the add-on is adapted. Active support during workdays, at least, is what the supported block or the panel signifies. So it's good to know that the app is supported and that there will be a vendor that you can mail regarding issues with the app. On the right side, we have the more versions link, and what this means is that how new the add-on actually is, because if you browse all the versions that the app is compatible in, you will see how long the add-on has been developed, which again gives you an idea of how senior the app is, as in how long did the vendor work on it, and how often are the bug fixes released. So this is also something to keep an eye out for. If you're browsing the Atlassian marketplace and you're browsing all the add-ons, without clicking into a detail about a specific add-on, you might see the Cloud Security Participant badge underneath some of the add-ons. What this means is that this badge identifies cloud apps that are enrolled in the Marketplace Bug Bounty program, which will evolve to include more rigorous testing and security assessment. Like Atlassian says that they use a CAIQ Lite, an industry standard questionnaire that's aimed at addressing the 16 most crucial aspects of the cloud controls matrix. So this is also something to keep an eye out, because if an app has a cloud security participant badge, it means that it's under more close scrutiny by Atlassian, which also says something. In general, the app's features and use cases many times overlap. So I just picked one or two apps for each use case so that it's balanced and it doesn't seem like we're playing favorites. The most notable use cases for apps are in the area of post functions. While on server and on DC, the apps also provide interesting conditions and validators. In cloud, most of the conditions and validators are already there. The apps don't really extend the offering that much. However, both on cloud and on server and DC, workflow apps pack many interesting post functions that regular Jira doesn't have. Some of the popular use cases are sending a custom email after a transition. This brings me back to the events and notifications that Guillaume mentioned. You might choose to disable notifications altogether and just have them send during specific events, which can be done via a similar workflow app. I had a good experience with the Jira Mist workflow extensions for this. Scripting your own post function, condition, and validator is also very much possible. If you can't get into any of the existing conditions and validators and simply need a more sophisticated one, you can create your own advanced workflow function in Scriptrunner or Power Scripts. Creating several issues during transition is useful when you know that whenever, for example, you create a specific task in a specific project, it will have many subtasks or many stories underneath it. You don't have to create them manually, which is the added value here. I have included the Create on Transition add-on by Bob Swift as an example of an app that does this. Closing or transitioning parent issues that, depending on their subtasks or issues, is a very common use case, mainly in agile teams that work with epics and subtasks. For example, do not include or do not transition an epic unless its tasks has already been transitioned to a specific status. So this is also one of the use cases for which I have picked Jira Suite Utilities. That's the former name. I think it's now named Automation for Jira. No, I'm not sure about the new name, but it's made by Become, a Swiss app vendor. Calculating fields means that a field will get calculated upon an event, which can also be a transition. Let's say a field wants to show man days that are worked depending on logged hours. Let's say we're closing an issue and we want to include the number of man days worked depending on logged hours so that we can report later on the time worked or the days worked. I have picked the app Jira Mist Custom Fields, which can again change the contents of its custom fields based on workflows and post functions. So these are just a few interesting Jira workflow apps. Most of them you can use in cloud, like Jira Mist workflow extensions and Jira Suite Utilities. I think it's called Jira Automation Suite or something like that, and Scriptrunner. So all of these apps have a trial version in which you can evaluate them for free. So you can choose the right workflow app that that accords to your needs and specific use cases that you want to employ in Jira. You can find all of these apps if you go to the Atlassian Marketplace and type workflow apps or workflow into the search bar. So thank you for your participation. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope this webinar has been useful for you. Again, if you have any questions or ideas or some comments or feedback on today's webinar, feel free to shoot me an email on kamil.ber@idalco.com. And if you have any questions right now, comments, feedback, or some other insights and remarks based on what we've been through, please write them down in chat and we'll reply to you. This time's for you. Okay, so first there's a question by Megan that's been already answered by Guillaume. So thanks, Guillaume. But the question was, when transitioning through a workflow, can you notify specific people when the issue has moved to a different status? Yes, I would say that you definitely can. I think you can actually use the post function that sends an email where you would specify the well, the users that are supposed to receive the notification. So I've seen this adapted quite a few times. So the email post function is very useful. Guillaume says that you can also use the events and regular notifications.
Yeah, and may I add another point? If you use Jira Service Management, and if the user is a customer and not an agent or a specific user from Jira, it means that you also have a specific system for the customers. And you have the customer notification when you change the status visible to the customer. So if the specific user is a customer, you could also use it with Jira Service Management directly. And if you use something like automation, because it's kind of included in Jira Service Management, you could also use GQL, etc., to configure a way to send some notification or message to people. So it's a kind of plus.
Right. There's a question by Stanislav. Some JSU post functions are natively on the cloud version. The JSU app was the Jira Automation Suite, formerly called Jira Suite Utilities. Do you know which ones aren't included with it? Well, I can't really remember which ones haven't been ported to cloud, but whenever you install a workflow app and then you browse the list of the post functions condition on validators on your edit workflow screen, the app's post functions or the extra advanced workflow features usually have a note next to them that says in parentheses JMWE function or script runner function. So I think this is a good way to distinguish which apps are native to cloud and which advanced features are native to cloud and which are actually added by an app. Okay, you're welcome. Okay, it looks like this is it. So thanks everyone for your participation and thank you for the great questions and comments that you had. We will be sending a recording of this webinar at in a few days. So you can, for example, check the workflow apps that we have mentioned. And yeah, I suppose this is it. So thank you very much and hope to see you on our next webinar. We will have another webinar in a month called Governing the Atlassian Stack, which will be more in depth about how to tidy up your instance and keep it under some good principles as it scales. So thanks a lot. And
Thanks to
thank you,
you.
Guillaume, for your help.
You're welcome. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye.